Feeling Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm Ben from Universal Audio, and welcome back to yet another Office Hours. Happy Monday, everybody. Hope you guys all had a great week, had a great weekend. But today, we've got a great show lined up for you guys, but it's kind of a special Monday. I've already seen you guys call this out in the chat. We've been doing this for over a year. It's insane to think about. We've been hanging out together, coming together, geeking out about Luna, hanging out with incredible artists, with incredible people from inside UA as well. And today is no exception. I've got with us Drew, Matt, and Connor back in there. How you guys doing?
Good. Hey.
Good.
Doing well.
Good to see you guys.
Nice to be here. Nice to celebrate a year of
right?
Luna and Luna Office Hours. It's pretty wild.
You're right. It's, man, what a crazy, it's crazy to think back. Like, it was a lot of fun launching it, but it's also been so cool to see how Luna's grown, both in terms of features and functions, like stuff that we didn't even expect to happen inside the first year, all coming in here, and just the amount of music that's getting made in there now it's incredible.
Yeah, it's super awesome. It's really wonderful to see Luna doing so well in just one short year. We've released 17 releases since we launched 1.0. Working on our 18th now, and it's just that's wild. There's a lot of good stuff going on. It's been wonderful to be able to share so much in such a little time with everybody.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah, and I get to see it every day. Every day, man, I see people just talking about how it's changed their lives. I mean, I'm not to over exaggerate, but I mean people whose musical lives have been transformed by this little app here that just makes making music fun and cool and inspirational and sonically, helping them make things sound better. It helps a lot of people who maybe people don't necessarily know about tape machines or consoles, but they put these things on here and boom, next thing you know, like their stuff is sounding better, and it's palpable for them. So it's awesome to see.
Oh yeah, 100%, man. And it's always so cool because he agrees.
It's barks of agreement. That's what I was thinking.
Barks of agreement
has nothing to do with the car alarm outside. But the other cool thing, man, just always got to shout out, man, the intro music and photos that you guys are all sharing with us. It's always so fun to sit here and hear what you guys are doing. So, as always, if you guys, if you've got music to share that you've been, making with Luna or inside UAD, hit us up live at uaudio.com's email address. Send us an MP3 and a little bit of a synopsis about how the song came together and how UA was a part of it. And of course, if you're sharing images, just post them over on social media with the hashtag Universal Audio. And that's how you guys can show up there in those intros. There was some really cool music in there today. I saw people in the chat calling out the Sgt. Pepper vibes from that second one, which was really cool. And of course, as always, we got a couple of great promotions going on. Just gonna get these out of the way before we get into the real deal for today's show. If you guys buy a desktop interface like a Twin or an Apollo Solo, you get a ton of free plugins along with that interface. So if you've been thinking about it, now's a good time to do it, as well as the custom shop is going on. So if you've had your eye on any plugins or extensions, it's a really good deal to get them right now. So definitely don't miss out on either of those. And so now we can, if you guys have got questions, as always, hit us up in the chat. We're checking out the chat. We'll try to get to everyone's questions as best we can, but we are here to talk about automation. And this is something that for a lot of us, right? This is kind of like the icing on the cake as you're making a mix. But also sometimes it's kind of the fundamental thing that you need to be able to, differentiate a verse from a chorus, or be able to compensate for little things in the performances. There's so many different ways that you would use automation to kind of craft the sound and kind of make it dynamic along with the musicianship that's going on in the track. That it kind of warrants its own show, and there's a bunch of different ways to create automation, to edit automation, and we figured we've had a few people asking in the chat in the last couple of weeks, and also I think over social media and on the forums asking about, hey, let's you guys do a whole deep dive thing around automation. So that's what today's show is going to be all about. We're going to walk you guys through every aspect of automation. I guess best place to start, Drew, is like thinking about there's kind of basically essentially two ways to approach automation, right? There's either like drawing it in kind of the offline mode and clicking and dragging and trimming around, or there's the real time where you kind of put it into a quote unquote like a writing mode and use your mouse to be able to kind of create those automations in real time, correct?
Yeah, that's a great way to start. That's a great place to start, is to differentiate between those two, basic ways of doing automation. So we're gonna do the real time one first, because maybe that's one that people haven't played with so much. And the concept of real time automation, it means that the transport needs to be running. That's the differentiator, right? So if the transport's running and you're interacting with the app and with the automation system as time travels, that's what we mean by real time. And then we'll cover the graphical stuff. Matt's going to cover that after we do this. So as you mentioned, yeah, the main thing that you have to understand is, in order to do real time automation, you have to tell Luna what you want to do. And so we have these automation modes. So if you want to go ahead and share screen, I can start walking through these. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about this area down here, right above your pan controls on any given track. And if you click on that, you'll see that you have your automation mode. So of course, off is off. It turns off the automation. So this is handy if you have automation written and you just kind of want it to go away for a second, but you don't want to delete it. You just want the fader to stop moving for you. Then we have our default mode, which is read, which will play back the whatever automation that you've got going on. And then touch, latch, and then there's a little line break right here for trim. So we're gonna go over all of these. And I'm actually going to show this. Even though this is real time, I'm going to show this in sort of a split screen. I've got the focus channel here on one channel, and I've got this first track here. I've got it in showing the volume. So I'll just show you both ways. So the first thing I want to do, let's demonstrate what you're likely going to use most, which is probably touch mode. So I'm going to put this track in touch, and again, because it's real time, you have to hit play on the transport. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play, and then I'm going to grab the fader and I'm going to move it up and down, and you'll see that automation data has been written in, and it was only writing during the touch, right? That's the whole concept of touch. It's touch to begin writing, and then when you untouch, it lets go. So pretty straightforward so far. Let me demonstrate latch real quick. So I'm going to put the track in latch, do the same thing. Now the difference here is that latch is similar to touch in that the moment you touch, it begins writing, but you can let go, and you don't have to hold your finger there the whole time. So let's try that. So I'm going to bring it down a little bit. Then I'm going to let go. I can of course come back and continue to touch it and move it. And when I hit stop, you'll see that it was writing only it was writing the entire time, even when I wasn't touching. And so those are the first two main modes.
Also, the big thing for latch too is you guys will notice it now updates, like when you press stop, if there's no other automation points on the rest of that track, you'll see it instead of going back up to 0 where the fader was, it's now writing. It's like, oh, and here's where he parked it, so it continues that forward. It's probably the most important concept about writing automation if you're going to touch and latch. These are the two modes. It's pretty easy. I like to keep track of two of them. But it's super important to know that touch is just going to update when you're clicking on it, when you're actively, and you can hold it still. Some people kind of worry like, oh, what happens if I don't move for a while? Does it reset? As long as you're touching the control, which with the mouse means you have it clicked down, it's going to keep on holding that setting.
Yeah, so I'm doing that right now.
Until you let go. And then when you let go, it goes back up to the point where it was previously. Whereas latch, it'll continue to overwrite up until the next automation point, and if there is none, it's just going to go on forever.
Right. Yeah. So I was just doing that in that pass, was just holding, just doing the touch repeatedly without moving the fader. So those are the first two. That's where you're going to spend the majority of your time in those two guys. And then of course read, when you're finished, you can put it back into read, and it'll play back those moves that you had done. So those are the basics, right? And by the way, this holds true for everything, right? I'm just showing you a fader, but mutes, pans, even your extensions, right? Even your tape extensions and your summing extensions, even the utility row. All of this can be you can use real-time automation with this.
Yeah. Well,
so let me
there's a few people pointing this out. They're asking about control surface support. We'll hit this right away because, guys, all this stuff we're teaching you guys today is going to apply when control surface support drops. We can't comment exactly when that's happening. We showed you guys a little preview at the beginning of the year of what it's going to look like. But just know that everything we're showing you guys here today is going to apply to when control surface support is implemented inside of Luna, and you'll be able to take this and rather than having to do it, we'll explain it all today using the mouse, but in the future you'll be able to do this with a control surface.
Yeah. This applies globally. So let me go ahead and put a move in here. and I'm gonna make this a pretty radical move, and I did that in touch mode, and then so now I've got this. Now I have this mode, this thing written in, and so I want to talk about. Here's where we can talk about trim mode rather, and so I'm gonna put the track, turn on trim mode, but leave touch. So trim is initially. Trim can be used with touch, it can be used with latch, and then also show you how you can use trim with read. But the basic premise behind trim is it solves several problems. First and foremost, when I hit play, if I'm not in trim mode, when I hit play, you'll see my fader's moving, right? It's a moving target. So thing number one that trim solves is it keeps me from chasing a fader.
I never thought about it that way before, yeah.
Yeah. So that's number one. Number one, trim mode keeps me from chasing a fader. And so if I put it in trim, and let's say this move is perfect, but it just needs to be a dB softer, right? I can hit play, grab it, pull it down a tiny little bit. And once it gets past the move, I'm going to let go. And when I hit stop, or even before I hit stop, it coalesced that trim into my volume automation. So let me hit undo. And you can see that little movement that I did there, undo, redo. Mm-hmm. You can see that I trimmed that without having to chase a fader. So that's problem number one that it solves. The other problem, the other problem that it solves is fader resolution. So you'll notice that this particular track it's pretty much around zero, but faders are at their most sensitive in and around the zero line. And you'll notice that every time you put a fader in trim mode, let's say even if I'm right here, see how far down my fader is? But when I put it in trim mode, it puts it at zero. So that's problem number two that it solves. It puts you always in the sweet spot for fader resolution. So those are the uses for trim mode. Of course, we can also do trim. Let's do trim latch. So I'm in trim mode, but I'm also latch, and you can see right here that there's a little T that comes up next to the fader that lets me know that I'm in trim mode, and of course the fader's gold. I was like,
come on, it's the gold. It's really the golden fader. That's the giveaway there.
Yeah.
And you guys, if you guys are following along at home, if you guys have checked out some other episodes, especially like we did this with Fab, you'll notice like the Everyman Luna session. There's some golden faders, and that's a different trim mode that we'll get to here in a second. But this, when Drew showed me this trick that he's doing, because I've always done it the way that Fab did it, where you kind of like write all of your automation, then you put it into trim read mode.
Yeah.
So it's just globally saying, hey, trim this everything on this track, trim all that automation down a dB or two or whatever. But being able to write it and use the trim fader, this, just kind of open up my mind, because this is going, and Drew will do another example here where you've got fader moves, you've got stuff going on, but then you just say, hey man, for like the bridge, I just want to bring up the vocal a dB, but you've got all these complex moves. So, by default, my mind, I'm like, all right, let me try to select all this and drag it up, and kind of do it drawn in. But what's even easier is just to do what Drew's showing us here. Put it into latch or write trim mode. Play it. Go to the spot that you want to trim up a little bit, and then all you have to do is just hold that golden fader up the amount that you want it to trim up or down. And then as you're playing it back, it automatically scales all of the automation over that section up or down the amount that you do it. And this is it really this is such a powerful way to update and kind of, and you can do multiple passes of this, guys. Like the cool thing is you can do a little bit, you can be like, is that enough? No, let me do a little bit more. Like you can kind of just keep this like building upon each other, making little moves, and your fader's always in that sweet spot.
Look, I'm going to do a little trim, and then watch what happens. It comes up a little bit. Then, like Ben said, if I want that, I still need more. It can come up, get a little bit more, but only on the first half. And then I let go. So I'm literally building. This is what trim mode has always been to me. So when I saw Fab doing only that one small part of it, I was like, wait a minute, we need to tell this whole story, because this is what this is from consoles. And this is, on moving fader systems, like how else could you get it to not literally chase a fader, right? Otherwise you'd be chasing a fader. And with other like SSL consoles use VCA based systems where the fader doesn't move, and you literally would use trim mode out of necessity because the fader wasn't moving. The fader just became a way of importing a trim. Yeah. So those two are these are the main real-time things. And hey, and just so people know, like if you're used to doing graphical stuff that we're going to cover in a minute, don't sleep on this, because this is something you can do. This is a very different kind of a workflow. Like look at my mixer right now. When you're in the final stretches of a mix, and this will become even more so when when MCU support comes, but this is literally like, I can have all of my faders in touch trim, and you'll notice, look, everything is at 0. It's in the sweet spot. And I can sit here, and this is one of the things you can't do with offline automation, is like grabbing faders, and doing a mix that allows you to jump around, touch faders. It allows you to close your eyes and listen to the music and do vocal rides. I think, like to do a vocal ride with your eyes closed in the sweet spot is a different animal than sitting there staring at breakpoints, So if you've done a lot of offline stuff, then definitely try this real-time stuff because it's super cool. And then, so I guess the last thing is to just, is to show the part, that one last thing that the part that Fab would show, which would be to put things in reed trim. So now reed trim, you still have the gold faders, and let's just use this track here. But what it allows me to do is to just pull down this fader. And even though I have not changed the automation, right? It just becomes, this is a trim control for playing back whatever was existing there. When I exit out of trim, then that offset will be lost, or it'll go back to it goes back to where it was.
When you're in the reed trim, you're only getting the trim as you are in that trim mode, and then as soon as you disable trim, it goes back to, all right, here's where the automation was. So, which is again another reason why I kind of like the way you're showing us here, Drew, of being able to commit these changes and just give it a nudge, push it up for a section, pull it down for a section, and then you commit those moves to the automation that you already have. And I mean, and this is also something too that I've picked up from guys like Jakir and I think I'm pretty sure if you guys check out the Cass McComb session, you'll see this. There's fader moves everywhere, and this is kind of a big point in mixing that kind of distinguishes a rough from a final for a lot of folks. It's these little details, it's these little automation moves, whether it's kind of writing the vocal or kind of pushing. Yeah, now we're getting you now, Connor. It was a weird static coming through. What will happen is you get little fader moves for making sure every detail of the vocals heard, for kind of pushing the drum fill into the chorus. Like there's all these reasons to kind of give yourself time and give yourself a few passes through the song of listening for, hey, can I hear everything I want to hear at the moment? Oh man, the guitar player did something really dope there. Let me just exaggerate that for a minute. And this is, again, throwing into that touch trim mode. You can just, hey, let me bring out that guitar fill for half a second. Just squeak it up a little bit, and then let go, and you bring it right back down. It makes mixes sound so much more human, which is really again just makes it more of a final mix than a rough in my mind. Yeah, for sure. I've had the opportunity to be in the studio, the room with Andy Wallace during a couple mixes, and his mix. He's mixed 100 million records, over the last 100 years or whatever. But he automates the hell out of everything. Just constantly, just pushes here and there. That crash cymbal's not loud enough, just lots of little stuff. So, playing the console. That's the thing about real time. If you've not done a lot of real time automation, it's literally playing the console like an instrument. Right now we're doing it with the mouse, but when MCU comes, we're going to be able to do it with our fingers, and it's a really cool way of interacting. Of course, everything I just said, other than trim mode, applies to sends, right, and pan knobs, of course, and plug-in automation, and as well as the tape extensions and the utility row, as we mentioned. Cues are not part of it; they're just not, just not a part. They're not part of the mixing process, so there's no need to automate those. Nice.
But yeah, so that's the real time stuff.
Get a couple questions in here from the chat for you, Drew. So trim. So Prince was asking trim mode. Does it only work when you're pressing, and then does it go back to regular? So yeah, Prince, when you're in trim touch or trim latch, you're getting the same. Remember, the key thing to know here is touch means that while you're touching it, it's going to be writing automation. When you do latch, it'll start the automation when you first touch it, and then continue to write it until you press stop. So always keep in mind those are your two write modes. And then when you add trim to either of those two modes, it's now just adding an offset to the automation that's already on the track. And then
and I was gonna say, speaking of write mode, some of you might have noticed that Luna doesn't have it, and that's because write mode is kind of, in my mind anyway, it's obsolete. It's a bit too much of a steamroller. If you put a channel in write mode, it's going, and then you hit the space bar, it's going to plow through all automation playlists for the entire track. So like
Yeah.
for me, it's a blessing that Luna does not have write mode. Other DAWs you'll notice have them, but that's kind of from back in the day when you couldn't isolate different parameters. But with Luna, it's just, there's no need for write mode. It's just, you're touching, you're clicking, whatever it is in either touch mode or latch mode.
Yeah. And so someone else was asking about mute automation.
Yeah.
And so mute automation, as far as I know, Drew, right? It acts exactly, it's, same process, same method, except it's a switch instead of a gradual fader.
Yeah, just two states, So if I put this in touch and I do a mute, it's either going to be on or off, right? That's the only two possible states that it could be in. And so it's as simple as that. To do that in real time,
To say that part specifically, it is a very interesting nuance, I guess, which is that switches, while in touch mode, behave as if they're latching because they're actually like held down, and so there is a little bit of a difference there between touch and latch for switches. Switches basically always latch because they you press them and they remain in that state.
They do their thing, yeah, right. And then when you press them again, they do their other thing, and it's
Exactly.
either one or the other, right? Yeah.
Welcome, Robo Connor. I think we're getting two copies of your voice coming through now, Connor. We got rid of the static though.
Today. Yeah.
The static is gone now though. So
It's a new plugin we're working on.
I'll troubleshoot this. I'm going to mute again this time though.
Nice. So that's any other questions around writing? People are asking about MC control surface support. Not yet, guys. We're
working on it.
Team is still working on it. But again, if you want to check out kind of some ideas of what it might look like, we did a preview show at the beginning of the year. Just make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And then you can go back through the archives there. You'll find the
it was January 28th. Yeah, January 28th.
Like Drew knows exactly when it was.
That's true. I refer people to that one pretty often.
Yeah, nice. Great. So that's real time.
I think we about covered it, right?
I think it's about everything to do with real time.
Yeah.
So now the other side of the coin now is the off, the kind of non-real time, or being able to kind of write and use click and drag and draw and do all the automation. This is actually fully honest here. This is kind of the way I do most of my automation. Is kind of like selecting and moving and drawing breakpoints. But I think Matt, you've got some tracks here that we can kind of walk people through all the different aspects of drawing in automation and making fine little moves here.
Yeah, totally. And these two go together too. Like you can start with real time stuff and then do the stuff Matt's about to show you, or the reverse if you've got some basics done with the graphical automation that you can then refine it with with some touch feel stuff like that. So yeah, these are, it's not an either or thing. They really can be both two parts of your toolkit. So
yeah, good point.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm the same way as Ben, where most of the automation work that I do is manually drawing stuff in and moving things around. So. Just before we dive into that, there's a couple keyboard shortcuts that make it kind of handy depending on what you're doing for automation. The one that I use the most, Control Command left and right arrows, that'll cycle through the main automation modes. So if I click on the automation here, you'll see there's this output section with volume, mute, left pan, right pan. If you use Control Command left and right, you can cycle through those. Nice. So let's bring up volume, for example. So there's kind of two ways you can interact with the automation as far as drawing it in with your mouse. You can double click to add a breakpoint. And I can double click to add another breakpoint, can drag that one around. It'll automatically ramp down or ramp up between the two breakpoints depending on how I move them. You can also hold down Control and you'll get the pencil tool and you can draw in. And by default, if you have snap on, it'll snap to the grid lines. I'm on quarter note snap right now. You can either turn snap off or you can hold down Control and Command. Let me get rid of this automation. So command is basically whenever you're doing anything in Luna, command with snap on. Command will temporarily just disable snap. So I'll hold down Control to get the pencil key. I'll hold down Command to turn off snap temporarily. And now I can draw in with finer resolution. It's basically not snapping to the grid lines.
Nice. That's another really good one. Just the file away for you can always use this one whether you're moving regions around, moving automation, drawing automation, just adding that command to whatever thing you're doing takes it off the grid temporarily without having to go, disable, turn snap on and off and constantly be forgetting, like, am I still in snap or am I in slip? Like, what mode am I in at the moment? You can always know, just by adding command allows you to slip out of the grid controls.
And to add one thing to what you said, Matt, about double clicking on the breakpoints, when you double click, no matter where you double click in the vertical space of the swim lane for the channel, that breakpoint gets added at the exact value of the line. So if you have a ramp and you want to add a new point without changing where that value is at first, to like experiment with a subtle change in that instead of having it jump, you just double click and that breakpoint will get added exactly on the line in that vertical position. So it's not changing the value, it's just adding a breakpoint. Whereas if you hold down control and enter the pencil tool mode, the breakpoint gets created exactly where you click the mouse. So like right under the pencil tip, and then versus directly on the line.
Nice. Cool. Yeah, that's a great point. Just to like demonstrate that. Yeah, if I click, further down on the clip here, it still adds it up here on the line. Great point.
It's really, really helpful, especially if you, like you mentioned, Connor, like if you have a ramp already in place and you want to just like, add a midpoint to kind of, change the taper of it a little bit. It's nice to not have it just add the point. Like, oh, you wanted it down here? Okay. Like,
yeah, you have both options with the double click and the pencil. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. And then, you'll notice when I hover over an automation point, it gives me that little readout display, shows me what the value is and what the automated parameter is. When you move around, just grab and drag around, it moves in larger chunks. If you want more fine control, you can hold down the shift key, and then you can really get finer control if you're trying to get to like specific, point something. That's super useful for that.
Yeah, it's another global modifier that just file that away, and it becomes kind of second nature the more you guys do this, right? It's like before you're like, oh, I want to make a small fader move. Hold shift and move the fader or automation. Like a lot of these things kind of go from, they're not just automation tricks, but they can be used globally around Luna.
Yeah, totally. So one other keyboard shortcut that I find pretty useful, let's say I have some automation on both of these tracks here. If I kind of want to get out of automation mode, I just don't want to look at the automation anymore, I want to interact with the clips. If I have one track selected and I hit the minus key, it's going to automatically take it back to clips view. If I hit it again, it'll take it back to notes view because it's the instrument track. So if both tracks or all tracks in my session have automation showing, I can do option minus rather. And that'll take all the tracks out of automation view and just put them all back into clips view.
Nice.
So it's a really cool shortcut just for hiding all automation.
Yeah, that's one I remember all the time too when I'm going in and automating stuff. Like you can just hit the minus key. If you're on just a single track, minus key to quickly jump into the volume automation, minus key to jump back out. And then as Matt showed on instrument tracks, it goes between the clips and notes view by default instead of clips and volume like it does on an audio track.
Yeah, exactly.
I got a quick question here, just a little aside. Matt, Tommy is asking slip mode. He was wondering how do I get in and out of the grid like you do in Pro Tools. You just mind refreshing everybody? What's the keyboard shortcut to turn snap on and off in Luna?
Yeah, shift backslash will turn it on and off, and then again command will temporarily let you slip out of it.
Nice. And then you can also
just click on the button right there.
Yeah, and then you can also change your grid value really quickly as well, right? That's shift.
Yeah, shift plus and minus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. That'll cycle through all the different grid values, and you can also click on the grid menu and select one manually if you prefer that workflow.
Nice. Awesome.
I think one thing worth mentioning is that automation typically moves with the clip. So I have automation that's written in here. If I were to move this clip somewhere else, as soon as I put it down, you'll see the automation snaps to the clip. So yeah, that's super useful. I mean, most of the time, if you move a clip, you want the automation to stay with it. You don't want to have to manually copy the automation over. So that makes sure that always happens. You can also copy automation from one track to another. So if I just highlight this whole track while I'm in this automation view, and Command C, come down to this other lane would also have automation set up for the view parameter, Command V, and I can paste the automation there as well.
Nice. Yeah, so everything there's kind of an important thing here, right? You're pointing out, Connor, of like when you're in this view, you're looking at automation. If you select the automation, you're going to be acting on the automation. But there's actually the stripes at the top and the bottom of the clip that if you were to select those, you're now working on the clip, even though you're in an automation view, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So in Luna, with the track header and track footer, there's additional behaviors that are available essentially at all times, no matter what track view you're in, which is that there's sort of hit zones for different behaviors. So in clips view, you basically just have the header of the clip, which lets you immediately click and drag, and the body of the clip, which lets you make a range selection or click and drag to really, give you full access to the behaviors that you want at the top level of clip editing, basically. And then when you're in an automation view like this, the top of the clip still behaves the same, lets you click and drag, but then the entire center portion, the majority of the view there, can be clicked as a range selection. So when you click and drag, you're making a range selection across just the automation. And if you were to hit delete right now, Matt, you're not going to delete any part of the clip. You're just going to delete the automation. So that makes sure that you're not changing your underlying content, just the automation that you have selected. Then, without having to change views, if you need to, say, trim the clip, left edge or right edge, or make a selection and delete part of the clip, you go down to the footer of the clip and hover over the edges to trim, or make a range selection within the clip at the footer area, and that will then let you punch out a hole in the clip or duplicate a part of the clip, so you can do all of the workflows without having to switch back and forth between two views to do them. So it puts a lot of power right in these sort of really highly visible areas that have different behaviors based on what you see when you hover over them. The cursor will update to reflect what the behavior will be there.
Yeah, when you hit and also adding to that, the E key, will expand that so you can get the entire, if you're, you can get that entire view, like, so now you really have everything just laid out right in front of you.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. So that's control.
There's something else that you're actually demonstrating here too, which is the fact that that track is record armed. So all of the parameters that would then actually be sent over to Apollo while in ARM mode don't actually play back automation while you're record armed, because the Apollo DSP doesn't really support automation. Like, you can't, at least for the fader and stuff like that, it's not yet set up to have that capability. So that is an important thing to know about automation in Luna, which doesn't usually, translate to any real world issues, because most of the time you're not automating or relying on an automated pass while you're recording, for especially with something like volume. That's going to come much later in the workflow. So there's really not a major pain point there, but it is important to know that when you're record armed and ARM is on, the automation for things like UAD2 plugins that are on Apollo or the volume of the track, those things aren't going to play back their automation.
Yeah, great point. You notice when I put it in ARM mode, the volume automation turns gray. That's why as soon as you take it out, it'll activate.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it makes it's one of those like little subtle cues that that lets you know what's going on. And speaking of cool subtle cues, so Matt, something that we all just learned right before we went on air was there's a cool way inside when you hit on the view and you bring up over in the focus browser your automation. There's a feature, guys. The three of us, Connor just informed us about this. Apparently it's been in here for a while, but see that little gray button right there? That does something. I never knew it. It folds it down to just automate. So parameters that are automated inside of that, that quote unquote output folder. So, if Matt had, say, some mute automation on that track or some pan automation, it would just show the parameters that have automation present to them. So it makes it a lot, especially if you've got a lot of inserts on a track, it allows you, and especially I would do, this is probably more useful for plugins that have a ton of different automatable parameters. If you've automated one that's near the end of the list, this is a quick way to quickly hide everything that's not automated and show you just the stuff that is automated.
Yeah, it's really essential for those kind of plugins. There are some plugins that don't even name their parameters because they kind of host other, like Contact or something like that, where you only know what the parameter really is if you deep dive in the menus there, or just drag them around in real-time automation mode and then say, oh, okay, cool, it's like parameter number 611. I'm gonna just want to see 611 for now. So the same applies for MIDI CCs, which of course there's way too many of. and they all, serve their own special purpose in 1980, but you only use like, maybe a dozen of them now. But they're all there, of course. So that is certainly a very useful feature for the browser. Right now, it's only available for each folder. Of course, there's some pretty obvious improvements that we can make to that over time to like show the entire list at once with just the automated parameters. Lots of good stuff to, get your feedback on through the feedback button of what you want to see next with automation, because we're always, building up our lists of what to do.
Yeah. So there's a good question in here, Matt, that's also very relevant. Peter's asking, so when you save a template and you don't save audio in there, the template they will save automation data, right? Because they're trying to preserve where the faders are. And if you've written some automation data, you may actually end up with a template that has automation rides in there. So there's a really handy way to clear all automation on a track. Do you want to walk people through that workflow real quick? So say you totally messed up, or you want to make a template, you want to start over on your automation, there's a quick way to clear that out.
Yeah, totally. In the edit menu, there's this clear all automation option. It's grayed out right now because I don't have anything selected. But let's say I select a range here where all my automation is. I can go edit, clear all automation, and it'll wipe that out. And I believe it won't just do it for the parameter that's being shown right now. It'll actually do it for whatever parameters are automated in that section, in that selection.
That's right.
Everything. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the workflow there would basically be, the fastest way to clear all automation in a session would be to click on what we call the tracks ruler, or like the all tracks ruler, which is that brighter gray strip at the very bottom of the ruler section or the very top of the timeline. If you just place the cursor in there and then hit Command A, that's going to select absolutely everything. And then you can do edit, clear all automation.
Yeah, so this is a great way, and we talked about it in our template show. But major recommendation, guys, is if you finished a mix and you want to carry that forward, you want to make a template out of your mix to start mixing the next song or continue to move forward with the project. Always save a version before you do like all this stuff. It's undoable, as you saw. Matt could quickly undo these clear all automations, but it's always a good idea to this is the one the client loves. Make sure that's a version. Keep that safe as itself. Make a new version to call it 2template or something like that, and then you can kind of go wild and like I showed in one of my examples during that template show, kind of delete all the tracks that you don't need to carry forward into the template. Delete all the automation. Kind of clean it up and make it a suitable template to then apply to other songs. And this is a very key workflow to that is use that tracks. That light gray one, Connor, you're right, man. That thing comes in handy all the time, even for like shift edits, right? For being able to like cut out a portion of the song. Like, it's really handy to be able to click on there and select things, and then also be able to take out all the automation in a session really quickly.
Yeah, it's super handy.
Exactly. One thing too to cover is that you can, and maybe I'm scooping you on this, but I just want to make sure it's captured here, is that if you can trim a section of written automation in the timeline here, just like you can manually. Cover. Cool, right on. Let me just shut up then. I'll turn some noise back on my microphone.
No, thanks for the transition.
Back to robot Connor. Back to robot Connor.
That was a perfect segue.
Perfect. So yeah, just like Connor was saying, Drew showed us how to do kind of a real-time trim. You can also do offline trim, or manual trim, whatever you want to call it. Basically, I can highlight all this automation that I have here, and then I can click, and you see there's a little up and down arrow that appears when I hover over it. I can click and drag either up and down, and I can scale all the automation up or down together. And it doesn't, if I move side to side, it doesn't actually move the automation side to side, so I don't have to worry about being perfectly precise. I can just grab it wherever, drag up and down, and kind of trim it that way. So that comes in handy a lot.
And it creates those nice anchor breakpoints. It doesn't create any weird ramping between breakpoints, which I can't stand in other things.
Yeah, exactly. You'll notice wherever the selection starts and wherever it ends, it'll create breakpoints right there so that it doesn't affect anything outside of the selection. It's just whatever I have selected inside of it.
Mm-hmm. So, Matt, say you wanted to delete a single breakpoint inside of there. I know there's basically, 2-3 ways to delete a point?
Yeah, I think there's 2 ways. The way that I do is just double-clicking on the breakpoint. That'll remove it. Mm-hmm. You can also hold down the pencil or the control key to get the pencil tool. You notice when I'm not hovering over a breakpoint, it's facing with the point down. As soon as I hover over a breakpoint, it flips around, so now I'm erasing it. And if I click, it'll erase the point. So I can kind of drag. Yeah, I guess you can't drag, but you can just click on each breakpoint, and it'll erase it while you're holding down the control key.
Nice. And you could also make a selection across one or two breakpoints and then hit the delete key, I believe.
Right. Yeah, I guess that'd be the third way. Yeah, you can just select one, delete, do it that way as well.
Nice. And the cool thing about especially the bracketing guys is you can use, as I remember, so when you're on an audio file, hitting the tab key takes you from transient to transient to transient. When you're in automation view like this, tab takes you from breakpoint to breakpoint to breakpoint. So if you want to get precise onto a certain breakpoint, you can use that tab workflow to go from breakpoint to breakpoint to breakpoint, and then you can add shift to that. So shift tab is now going to select breakpoint after breakpoint. So you can grab a certain number of them and then trim those ones up or down as you like, which is a really cool feature.
Yeah, that's
And do be careful. Do be careful making breakpoints that go instantaneously from one level to another level while audio is underneath of it, because those things, that defies physics, right? There will be a little bit of a tick there,
Yeah, that's something I like. Whenever I'm drawing automation like this, it pains me to see a right angle like that. So a lot of times what I'll do is after I like a move like that, what I'll go in is I'll go in and remove whatever's making a right angle on my automation, because sometimes you'll hear it'll be audible occasionally depending on how massive of a move it is, but you may hear a little bit if it's trying to jump really, really fast. You might hear that as like a click or just a really sudden jolt of audio. Nice. Anything else around offline before we jump into MIDI CC stuff?
This is probably the deepest cut because I don't know that it's documented fully because it's like super obscure. But if you draw some breakpoint lines in again, just like a natural kind of curve using the pencil tool, there are actually two behaviors. That's perfect. So select just the right portion of somewhere in the interior. Perfect. Now press delete. Actually, don't select that last breakpoint. So select just a portion of a ramp.
Okay, yeah.
Perfect. Now press delete.
No ramp.
Okay, what you notice is that cleared all of the breakpoints from that section, but it didn't change the overall direction of the automation line. So that's like a nice way, if you've got too many unnecessary breakpoints, just delete to clear them out. Now undo that. Now press Command X to cut.
Oh yeah, this is dangerous.
Oh yeah.
Oh, but do it on the automation line. And so there's the two behaviors. Select within the automation area there. That's interesting though. That I think you just found a bug because it should just have selected the automation. So now do Command X.
Yeah.
So if you need to zero a line at the particular point that your automation, you want to not have a ramp at all, you need to have a flat line from the previous value. Cut will actually cut the whole thing back to the line, the breakpoint right before the selection. So super tweaky, but also one of those kind of powerful features. If you know the differences there, you can achieve two of the possible desired results from wanting to delete or remove automation breakpoints within a ramp or a line segment.
That's really smart.
Connor, there's a question from the chat asking about thinning automation. Does Luna is there any benefit to being able to having less breakpoints? Is that more taxing to Luna or not?
At some theoretical point, thinning automation is definitely there's really more of a visual problem now than there is a data problem. Certainly,
Gotcha.
It's just I could go too deep on that question because there are DSP concerns from other systems where it's literally possible to have too many automation breakpoints or breakpoints too close together and they need to be thinned out, but we don't really have that problem.
I guess that delete workflow the delete workflow you just mentioned kind of is that form of that. It kind of thins out the breakpoints while keeping the same basic intent intact, I guess.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah. So that we don't yet have a command, but I think the purpose of such a command, if we did add something like that, would really just be to show fewer breakpoints on a move that should really just look relatively straight or relatively smooth. But there are other ways to address things like that, like curves or shapes and things like that. So there's not really an issue that requires thinning of breakpoints in Luna.
Mm-hmm. There's a question here from B-World asking, is there a way to manually enter dB values or just dragging around?
No, but hit that feedback button because that's totally one of those things that goes in the list of, it would be wonderful, wouldn't it, to enter the exact value of a line segment or a ramp or a breakpoint for sure. Not yet.
Yep. So yeah, in the meantime, using once you have a point selected and you're moving around, hold the shift key while you're moving that around, and that'll allow you to fine tune it and really get it dialed in. One other thing I wanted to point out that we haven't talked about with talking about all this automation stuff, and this is something for a lot of folks if you're coming from a different DAW into Luna, one thing you're going to notice about Luna's automation is it's correctly delay compensated. There's issues in some other places, I believe, where if you try to write automation right on the bar, sometimes plugins can actually make that automation actually sound later than it's supposed to. I remember there was an early update to Luna, right, where we kind of worked on the automation delay compensation part of things, correct?
Yeah, it is important to acknowledge it's still not perfectly sample accurate, but it's within the whatever that 30 milliseconds range of can you hear it, can you not hear it kind of thing. So in some cases, depending on circumstances, you might or parameters or just overall data on the session, you might get a delayed change, but it is delay compensated, so if it will definitely align with the overall system delay. But there are cases still where it's it's not exactly sample accurate like it may be in some other environments. But typically, it's again a good reason why steep ramp or straight line down or straight line up, while sometimes necessary, is typically can be an issue. So either just give it a little bit more padding, or only go in and address it if you encounter it, because you probably won't for the most part, but it is possible to hear some delay on certain right angle automation moves with certain parameters and plugins.
Nice, awesome. Well, so Matt, let's so we've been talking so far. This has all been volume automation and audio track information, but the other side of making music is all the instruments and being able to use MIDI CC, which is similar to the automation we've been shown, but also can be slightly different. So what do people need to keep in mind when they're working with MIDI CCs and MIDI automation?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, for a lot of things, like for the Mini Moog, for example, there's a lot of things that you can automate from just the normal automation view, like filter cutoff, for example. And there's actually also a MIDI CC for it, so it's kind of hard to determine, when should I use one, when should I use the other. So let me just show how to get to MIDI CCs, and we'll get into the use cases for either one. Okay. So if you've used instrument tracks before, you're probably familiar with this little velocity button up here that opens the velocity lane, which normally you can use to just edit the velocity of your notes. If you click on this velocity label right here, that opens the MIDI CC menu, where it has all of the different MIDI CCs here. Some of them are labeled, some of them, it's just according to the MIDI spec, so some of them are labeled as what they are, like modulation, breath control, etc. Some of them are just generic names, like controller 20, controller 21. So it really depends on what plugin you're using as far as what are those generic ones are tied to. For the Mini Moog, we have this article on help.uaudio.com, just the main Mini Moog article, and at the very bottom of it, there's a section that shows which MIDI CC is tied to which parameter. So for example, 74 is filter cutoff frequency. So let me pull up that. If I just type 74, it'll bring it up. It's labeled brightness because that's what the MIDI spec is, but it's actually controlling the cutoff. So let me open the Mini Moog. You see the cutoffs over here. I have a MIDI controller in front of me with a knob that's mapped to MIDI 74, or CC 74 rather, and you can see it's controlling the cutoff frequency. So Luna doesn't have MIDI mapping right now, so there's no way to just assign a knob to the cutoff frequency within Luna, but you can actually change the mapping. If you have a MIDI controller, it lets you change the mapping. You can map your knobs to those MIDI CCs or listen to that article, and you can kind of get real-time control that way. So I'm able to control the cutoff frequency that way.
Nice.
So, like I mentioned, you can also do that from the automation lane. If I just search cutoff, I have filter cutoff here. This is where I can draw in automation for cutoff, but I wouldn't actually be able to record automation for the filter cutoff in real time via this automation lane because there's no way to map something to it.
See, I was just about to ask you that. So that means, even though you on your keyboard you have a control that's moving that knob, if you were to write automation, it wouldn't capture that. It would capture it as CC data, not as automation data. Correct?
Yeah, I believe that's right. And let's test that out. Yeah, so it's moving the control because the control is actually moving, but it's not seeing it as automation data, so it's not recording it to the track. So if I want to record that in real time, that's what I would actually use the MIDI CC for instead.
Yep.
Well, couldn't you arm the track so long as MIDI merge it, and with MIDI merge on, it would just add that?
It will record, now that the track's record armed, it'll record it as a MIDI CC.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah. You get out of that. Yeah, so it records it as a MIDI CC, but still, there's still no automation data for filter cutoff in the automation lane itself. So it's just recording as a CC, not as normal automation.
Yeah. Whereas
I'm
if
a
you
MIDI.
had the,
Forgive me. I'm a idiot. So just forgive me.
you've been waiting forever to use that one, haven't you, Drew?
Yeah, I haven't.
Well, and so the key thing to know here, guys, is that now, Matt, if you pull up the GUI again, you're going to see that knob. That knob is now responding to the MIDI CC data. But since you have it in touch mode, now if you were to click on that control and move it, it would try to write that automation on the automation lane version of it, not the CC version of it. Correct?
Exactly, yeah. So if I just touch and grab this knob, it'll record it on the automation lane. If I use my MIDI controller to do it, it'll record on the CC lane.
Yeah.
So yeah,
and what happens?
just
and what
depends
happens
on
if
how you want to record it in.
I was gonna say, what happens if you do both? Does everything break and your house start burning down, or what?
Don't cross
I've
the streams.
Yeah, I've never tried to record it via the GUI once I've already recorded with the MIDI CC data. So yeah, I assume something weird would happen.
Yeah.
It just it fights. It's like whatever the next. It's like basically reading whatever comes next really quickly, and it'll just jump all over the place. So it's kind of like both are possible. You're probably not going to use both unless you're experimenting right now. So if you want to have some kind of crazy glitchy. Cutoff frequency experience, and you're doing something cool with it, you could push the system to its limits and see how it falls over in that way. But otherwise, avoid double automating the same parameter with MIDI and automation. Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice. Awesome.
So yeah,
okay, good.
now that let me show how why you'd want to use one versus the other. In addition to what we just showed there. So let me delete this. So I'm on the brightness CC, which is the filter cutoff CC. Whoa. You guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
All right, cool. Yeah, I'm not sure why that's happening. Probably because I try to do two things at once.
I was like, we probably have seen the result.
Just broke it.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay. All right. But you guys aren't getting blasted over there, right?
No, are you getting blasted?
No.
All right.
It's just the meters are lifted. Okay, cool. So, yeah, if I just start adding breakpoints in here, there's no when you add breakpoints in the actual automation lane, it automatically ramps between them, whether you move them. In the MIDI CC lane, it doesn't. It just stair steps them. So the MIDI CC lane is really not what you'd want to use for drawing in automation unless you're using the pencil tool, because it doesn't do that automatic ramping. If I have a breakpoint down here and a breakpoint up here, it just right angles it. So if you really want to draw in automation that's smooth and fluid and has ramps, you'd want to use the automation lane. But so the MIDI CC lane is really when you want to record real time by moving a knob on your MIDI controller.
Nice.
Yeah, and that's just a historical MIDI thing. It all boils down to resolution through what MIDI was capable of and devices were capable of, long ago. And there's only 128 points at which those MIDI CC breakpoints can be placed, whereas with the plugin parameter, it's like there's no real practical limit. There is a technical limit, but the resolution is very, very, very fine on an automation parameter on a plugin, whereas with MIDI, it stair steps just because that's literally what it does in terms of its practical application when automated. So yeah, it's a resolution thing, really, like you said. If you the pencil tool or not, it's like if you're turning a knob, like at some point, when you can actually turn the plugin knob instead of using MIDI, it's going to be that much more high resolution.
Yeah, and you can see even if I do the pencil tool, now my system's acting a little weird. Let me go back to cutoff here. Even if I do the pencil tool, it's still kind of stair-stepped, you can see.
Yep.
So yeah, it's just not very fine resolution. The only thing that's not true for is pitch bend. Pitch bend's kind of a special CC where it does have higher resolution. So if I were to add 2 breakpoints here and move one, it does automatically ramp between them just like an automation parameter. So
Interesting.
pretty much every CC doesn't have that high resolution except for pitch bend.
That's right. Yep.
And,
Cool. And then
got a question here in the chat asking about MIDI 2.0. Any plans for that you know of, Connor?
No, nothing to announce. It's certainly, there's a lot of interesting things about that could certainly be wonderful for the industry in terms of just consumer devices and really anything. I mean, it could really bring a lot of power to what you would see as like just a consumer level MIDI keyboard or something like that you throw on your desk with a few keys that could be that much more powerful. So we're definitely aware of it, definitely looking at it, but we don't have any plans to announce now. And yeah, 37 years in the making. Yeah, it's probably the longest 1.0 to 2.0 transition there might have ever been. We'll see.
We'll see. Let's see if Luna can challenge it, right?
all right, I think the last thing I want to show with MIDI CC, which I've seen people ask about in the chat a lot, is program changes, which you can also do in the CC lane. You'll see up in the general section up here, there's program change option. And if I just click to add a breakpoint, let's say right on bar 8, it'll bring up this little program change window. I can select, which parameters, which bank that I want to do for the program change, hit done, and it adds a little stock right there. So whenever it hits that, it'll send the program change data. So if you're
Have a
using
lot of people asked about that?
Dude, I never knew this. I did not know this
That's
was
amazing.
here.
I love that.
This is so cool.
Yeah, I've seen it definitely a few times in the chat. I think Victor,
that's wonderful.
one of our regulars, is always asking about it. So that's how you do that, Victor.
Wow,
Right
dude,
on.
I've never seen that dialogue window before. That's I was expecting you'd have to fine tune a line, but that's really dope that it pulls up a window specifically to be able to control these.
Yeah,
it's super intuitive. If you have
we
a list
debated
of,
whether to add it at the very beginning there in terms of how many people are really using are using program changes still, but certainly if you got external gear you can do a lot with this. So we did put it in there. It does create automation on multiple parameters because a program change is made up of a couple pieces of data. So there's a couple things that get updated with that dialogue. But yeah, it is a little special piece of work that got in there for V1.
That's super cool. So Victor's asking, how does he get to that? So Matt, quick from so if you weren't already looking at MIDI CC data, how do you get to making program changes like that?
Yeah, so you click the little velocity stock button here. That'll open the a CC lane. I'm already on program change. It would be on velocity by default. So click the little label, and then program change is the very second one. And then just click wherever you want the program change to start and set your parameters, and you're good to go.
That's cool. And yeah, so otherwise, you had to just double click. It's basically just like adding a breakpoint, correct?
Exactly, yeah. Just like adding a breakpoint, just double click. It'll prop up this menu first, and once you hit done, it'll add that little stock.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you can go back in and edit them as well if you double click on an existing one. And yeah, that top section in the browser there is made up of these channel messages that aren't CC based. So they're just considered different types of messages, and program changes are in that sort of channel category. And you just double click in the line, or I'm pretty sure you can use the pencil tool, but you can double click and it'll still just either way brings up that pop up. And then once you've got one on the timeline, you can edit it, and it should send the messages out. The way we built it is that if you have this open and you're playing keys on your keyboard to send messages out to a particular output through Luna, to control like a rack unit or something like that, as you drag the slider or use the left and right arrow buttons in that popover, it's going to send that message in real time so that you can actually truly audition the device. So it is fairly full featured for program changes.
Wow. Yeah, you just made Victor really happy. All caps happy right there, guys.
Nice.
This is really this is brand new to me. I had no idea this was in there and so well thought out. Good job on the team there, Connor.
Yeah, nice work. So yeah, I think that's about it for MIDI CCs. That's the gist of it.
Hell yeah. Awesome. Well, man, this is so we've talked about a lot of different aspects of automation. If there's any questions related to automation that we missed or didn't get to, drop them in the chat. I want to make sure we get this all out here in one episode. And yeah, so we talked about how to send out. Chris, question here: can you send MIDI out to hardware synthesizers? And the answer to that is yes, you can, Chris. Here, actually, I can share my screen here real quick and show you guys how that works. It's a pretty simple process. So you find a MIDI channel. For instance, right now I've got Synth 1 and Fab Session. So by default, when you have MIDI out set to none, it's going to route it to the instrument, which in this case is shape. Oops, there we go. And so now if I hit MIDI out, it's going to open up my focus browser over here. And now, since I have MIDI out selected, you can see it's highlighting itself. I now have available to me all my available MIDI outputs are now all over here, as well as the other instruments inside of my session. You see this one at the bottom labeled bridge pad thing. That's this other instrument track right here. So I can send MIDI from one track to another using the MIDI out if I wanted to. But for routing to a hardware synth, it's as simple as MIDI out and then coming over here and selecting, I'll select my Juno 106. So now MIDI from this track is being sent out to my hardware synth, and then I would just create a audio track with that input to be able to listen to that synth as a return. It's the easiest way to set that up.
I'm just always so impressed when people come up with like a really cool name for a preset, because all of mine are also named like something thing, or I'm like, oh, that sound, it's like a thing that you don't want to hear, but preset designers that are like, like Silver Zinger, and you're like, oh, that's just I want to hear the Silver Zinger. I can't do that.
Nice. Well,
there was one interesting question in the chat about like where someone can go to see how like pros automate, and I don't know that I have any specific resources, or if we can plug our various friends and people like PureMix or whatever, but there's plenty of you can just go to YouTube or whatever. One thing that occurred to me when Drew was mentioning it early on and talking about the real-time automation is that there's so much of this that's like to like a woodworker or a mechanic or whatever, that's just like the equivalent of cutting and measuring, where like you get this basic set of skills. It's literally applied just about everywhere. Like every DAW has these same terms for the most part, and there's going to be little nuances here and there, but it all basically came from analog console workflows as they developed the ability to record and playback automation with a computer attached, basically, instead of having the whole band and the producer and like the assistant sit there and literally as they were printing to tape move the faders and have to like look at notes and stuff. They computerized and motorized the faders and all that stuff. So the great thing about watching this show or watching videos on YouTube, it could literally be in any environment, and you're going to get some of the basic concepts that apply everywhere. It's like just a core principle of these tools for audio production is like how to automate a fader, and a lot of the terms are identical wherever you go. So you don't have to find something Luna specific. You're gonna learn and use it in Luna, which is awesome. But those concepts, if you go out and like hunt for YouTube videos, you could watch anything and like pick up some really cool concepts, because it's all gonna essentially be the same wherever you go.
Yeah, and that's one thing I always noticed, back from especially like PureMix videos, right? We focus so much on the producing the tracks, recording the tracks, getting like a decent route. There's, a lot of times magically the automation appears at the end, and now you see, even like in the Luna sessions that we have available for you guys, you'll notice like there's typically like a deep dark hole that happens between when you saw this mix being happen and when it was finally done with all the little automation moves. And that's really what it is it's a little fine tuning. It's it's responding to what you're hearing, responding to feedback from the artist or the client, and giving these little micro moves, these little moments, and for some producers it can be kind of a meditative process, right, where you're kind of listening and just, oh man, I just want a little bit more of that. Stop, roll it back a bar or two, do it again. Like I've seen guys do this in real time where they're just kind of doing a pass. And, they get their eyes closed, just listening, reacting to moving the fader up and down a little bit. They're like, all right, I got most of it, and they're kind of making a mental note of, I want to go back and hit the bridge again because there was that one word I didn't quite hear enough. They'll play it back, and then especially the trim stuff that Drew showed us today, that's essential for being able to just go in and be like, you know what, I want to raise the third word in the bridge. Boom, and just a little bit of a lift or a little bit of a tuck. You guys, I hope you understand how powerful of a tool the touch and latch trim modes are going to be for writing and creating and perfecting your automation on your mixes.
Yeah, and just to build on that, Ben, one thing, like I'm sure that lots of people out there watching us right now that can relate to the idea that maybe this will, be a wake up moment where you probably are compressing more than you need to be because you've not been doing your rides, quote unquote rides, or your moves, So it's like instead of spanking that vocal with extra compression, maybe let it breathe a little and do automation, And that's where the real time stuff that I showed at the beginning really allows you to kind of inject your sort of feel and vibe into those changes as you're doing real time rides. So just something, kind of dovetail with what you were saying.
You mentioned Andy Wallace, and I think he literally used faders as compressors, basically. Like he would automate to like the most specific, like just transient, consonants and like syllables, and using faders to do that stuff. It's remarkable.
He had an SSL console, a PCM 41, and an SPX 90. Like that was basically it, and he mixed most of those records. This was in the 90s up at. Yeah, it's crazy. It was, and this was on a moving fader console, so you could see that faders were moving a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, so we got a choice here for the audience. We do have a plugin feature of the day that we can get to. If you guys want to hang out with us a little bit longer, it's up to you. I'm going to leave it up to the audience to vote if we're going to do a plugin feature for today. So raise your hands. Let us know. Maybe hit the like button too. I don't know how this whole thing works, but raise your hands if you guys want us to hit a plugin feature at the tail end of today's episode if you're still with us, or if you want us to save it till to the next show. Let us know. But in the meantime, there was a good question asking, is there a way to control ARP's parameters via MIDI? So the ARP plugin, I think you were actually using that on your demo there, Matt. To be able to automate that, I know normal automation settings, we saw the automation lanes available for it. Is there a way to MIDI CC control those settings?
No, that one's not tied to MIDI CCs right now, so you just have to automate it via the normal automation lane. But that might be something that could be added. So hit the feedback button.
Yeah, great. And Connor, you're getting lots of love for your little UA effects setup there over the shoulder. You're making a lot of people jealous with the.
I've got lots of love for UA effects. My God, it's crazy how good those sound.
They sound so good. It's so cool. It's so cool seeing more and more videos of folks using them and them showing up online. There was one that Lisa Belladonna put out, one with the Moog 1.
Crazy.
And holy crap, man! So if you guys haven't seen that one, just hit the YouTube search engine, Lisa Belladonna, find her channel. I think it's her latest video. Holy wow, dude! It's mind blowing how good that is. All right, let me see the results. See if we got thumbs up. We got do it, yes. Hands raised, yeah. Okay, yeah. It's a resounding yes, Drew. So let's talk about channel strips. We want to do a whole series of these during office hours and kind of be able to talk to you guys a little bit about the channel strips, because these are arguably the most complicated, most complex UAD plugins that we have. They have the most knobs, the most features, but they're also the most powerful and the most useful. So you'll find yourself using these on mixes and tracking sessions all the time. So we figured it'd be a great place to kind of focus some energy and some attention and letting you guys know how these all work.
Yeah, so it's funny because when we put out the word for plugin, what plugins do you guys want to see? I got this back a lot, the channel strips, and it stands to reason because essentially we're looking here at if you want to, I don't know if you're sharing already, but if you want to switch over, what you're looking at here is essentially a channel strip of a console, so starting at the top of the console, you have the mic, you have the input section, the mic line input, and then you've got the dynamics underneath of it, and then filters, the channel, and then even the channel fader. So we've meticulously modeled all of this end to end from the mic and line inputs all the way through to the output faders, and including there's not a lot of coloration or not a lot happening on the output fader of a console, but it's there, and we've modeled it. So there is a lot going on here. There's a lot of switches, a lot of buttons. So I think we're going to do a segment on each one of these. And so the SSL is a good one to start with. And I guess we should probably just start with a quick little GUI run through. And then, as things come in on the chat, if there's any questions, we can stop for that. But yeah, so everything starts in the input section, right? And so we have all channel strips have a mic input and a line input. So we have we have a flip button here that enables you to toggle between the two. Obviously, if you instantiate this in the unison slot, then it will automatically switch to mic for you and choose that best operation. If it's if you're using this in a DAW or if you're using this in Luna for mixing, then obviously you're working on the line input workflow. Although I will tell you this, you do have the ability to override that. So you could be in the mixing, you could be in a mix mode and hit that flip button. And the reason why you might want to do that is because it allows you to run the signal through the mic preamp, and the mic preamp has a transformer that the line input does not have. So that's
if
a little.
If you guys are going
trick.
to take away one trick from this entire thing talking about the SSL, it is don't be afraid when you're using this on a mix session to hit the flip button, hit the transformer button. It automatically gains it up a little bit because you're now running through the mic preamp. But guys, let me tell you, like the tone that you get from running a track back, especially like, you know, if you have someone that just recorded a vocal very dry with no unison effect, like if it doesn't have that color, if it doesn't really have that character or life to it yet, this is the shortcut to like add just a real, to me, it's a very satisfying tone print on just about guitars, vocals, like anything.
Yeah.
That's kind of my number one go-to move with the SSL. If something's kind of low gain, kind of low energy, immediately hit the flip and the transformer button, put it up into the mic gain stage, and then I'll come over usually and pull that fader down because you're gonna get the bump.
You'll either have to pad it potentially if you just want cleaner transformer coloration, or like if Ben said, if you want to let it rip, you can come down here and pull it down here, or if you want that coloration to stay, then pull it down here on this. This is perfectly clean digital gain outside the model, whereas the fader is actually inside the model. So definitely try that. Otherwise, standard operation is it goes through the line input, which also has its own gain control. So if you do have a track that's a little bit softly recorded, this allows you to sort of gain stage into the model, right? So if you're finding that your track is really low and you can't quite get the kind of compression you want, then you can adjust the line trim to sort of feed that compressor how you'd like it to be fed.
Nice.
So that's step
the input,
one.
That's the input section. Yeah, and what's important for you guys to note at home is like the signal flow and how all these sections link together. The SSL is unique, and a few of the other UAD channel strips would do this as well. You're going to notice there's some buttons along the way that we're going to see that allow you to alter the flow of signal inside this plugin to change what comes first and what comes next. Because typically, right, the way it's set up now is it's going to go from the input section. I believe it goes through the filters and then into the dynamics. Or no, sorry, it goes through the dynamics and then the filters, right?
Yeah, well, by default, you have the and it's all kind of like you said, Ben, it's all sort of configurable. I think in the manual there's like a diagram if you want to get a good visual indicator of it, but we'll run you through it here. For me, my personal workflow is I almost always, I'll drop the EQ in, even if it's even just flat, and I'll put it pre-dynamics. I'll hit the pre-dynamics button over here because generally speaking, I want my EQ to happen first, then compress. Sometimes I'll change that up. But you do have a lot of flexibility, like Ben said. So for example, I could leave this post. I could make the EQ post dynamics, however, put the filters in front of the dynamics processors. So if you just want a high pass before the compressor, you can hit the pre-dynamic button here and, get your high pass so that it then high passes, then goes through the dynamics, then EQs. I generally do everything in front of the compressor, but there are times where, you might want that to be the case. Mm-hmm. I don't know. What do you do, Ben? Typically the order.
I'm usually filter pre-dynamics and then EQ post-dynamics.
Yeah. So, and I personally, I don't know whether it's, whatever, I always just like to put the EQ in no matter what, even if it's flat. Same. It just feels like it's like, well, I'm going through this. I might as well go through the whole thing. Mm-hmm. So maybe we could take the EQ first, since that's the bigger, that's a little bit more straightforward. It's a pretty typical, 4-band parametric EQ. Obviously putting it in circuit, and then the routing that we had just mentioned. One of the big high level decisions you can make is whether or not to choose black or brown. Generally speaking, black is more surgical, and it's more, especially when you're in the peaking type filters, which is when you hit the bell button. This is when you use the black one in bell mode or in peaking mode when you want to really like find the fundamental of that kick and have it hit real hard and tight and focused. Whereas brown is going to be a bigger, broader adjustment. And the same goes for the top end where you've got the bell button and the differing shapes of the high frequency.
Well, Well,
adjustment there.
and it's important to know that when the bell switch isn't in, so like by default, it's a shelf. So
Yep.
it'd take all the frequencies around 8K and above and lift all of those up. Whereas when you put on the
Yeah.
bell, and now it's just making a hump around the 8K area. And this is a really important thing one of the reasons why I love using channel strips like this instead of graphical EQs. Is it says 8K and it's a bell. How wide is it? How much is it doing? You stop caring about that stuff. Like this is
Exactly.
a big thing I learned from watching so many mixers, do their thing. Is man, and part of what they love about working on analog consoles is the fact you stop caring about the number so much. You're like, dude, I'm boosting plus 15 at 700 because that's what sounded like it needed. Like they're not self-conscious of like, man, I'm boosted plus 15, something must be wrong, or I cut minus 10. Like making those big moves and knowing that like these aren't they may feel like they're being very precise, but end of the day, like it's all about reacting to the sound in the moment. And these channel strips really, to me, encourage just listening, moving, tweaking, listening, and not really caring so much about like what setting to leave it on or trying to type in a perfect parameter.
Yeah, well, and in addition to that, the person who designed this person has gone forward in time and is helping you mix, right? Like they've made decisions. You see this on Neve plugins, on API stuff, where the designers have actually guided you, right? When you have a perfectly clean digital EQ that allows you to add as many 32 bands or as many bands as you want, like there's no guidance there, there's no help. So whereas this is like, oh, what do I need to make records? Oh, I need this. I need 4 bands, right? I need 4 bands that cover these ranges, and I need a compressor, I need an expander, and I need some high and low pass filters. Like this is like the sound of records for basically eternity. So if you're questioning it, if you're getting into this for the first time and a plugin like this kind of intimidates you, don't let it, because it's a guidepost, it's a roadmap. Put this on every channel, and this is all you need. You can think of it in those ways as well, to try and navigate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we have the EQ. We have the EQ here. By the way, the EQ is also, you'll notice in the EQ and the filter, they both have these DYN-SC, dynamic sidechain. Separately configurable are the filters or the 4-band parametric over here. They can be placed into the sidechain of the compressor. And what that means is that they'll stop processing the audio that you hear and will instead impact the reaction of the dynamics processors. So you can turn this channel strip into a de-esser if you want, or you can turn this, the filter. You'll notice when I switch it over to the dynamic sidechain, it's no longer available as a part of the EQ, and it's instead in the sidechain of the compressor, and it'll allow you to roll off some bottom end to keep the compressor from pumping on your kick drum or pumping on your bass guitar. And you still have the other 4 bands to act as your regular EQ. You're just sort of using the filters for the dynamic section over here, which is nice.
That's really
another
really
thing
helpful.
on the So another thing on the dynamics area, you might be typically we're used to 6 main parameters: threshold, ratio, attack, release, makeup, gain, and knee. Right? Those are your basic 6 parameters for compression. You'll notice we only have 3 knobs here. So we have threshold, we have a release knob, and we have a ratio knob. The attack is simply a toggle, right? It's this little red. I'm clicking on this red light, and you can see the drop shadow of the knob. This is what the actual consoles would do. Depending on the version, it was either a push knob or a push-pull knob that would allow you to toggle between these 2 attack modes. And the first one, the normal attack, is actually auto attack, or program dependent, where it's literally riding the transient. Which is super cool. And then the fast attack goes to, a few milliseconds, I think. And then the knee is not controllable. And then the other thing that's super helpful is the makeup gain. It has auto makeup gain. So it basically means you can just start adjusting. You can just grab your threshold and start compressing, and the compressor will automatically make up the gain for you, which is very handy.
Part of the reason why I love using this is like to me, this is one of the ultimate channel strips that I use on every single mix, is because it's such an easy to use. It's a very thoughtful layout, as Drew mentioned, but most importantly, this compressor, you can really get it to do just about anything you want. And, you don't always have to, you can use it to crush things. Like you can turn the ratio all the way up, crank the threshold down, just have it punish the drums, right? Using that on like a drum room can sound gnarly and amazing. But at the same time, you can also put the ratio to like 1.5 or 2, and the threshold.
Yeah.
You can be very, very reasonable with it, and it adds a little something to the tone. And oftentimes, what I'll find myself, like say on like a vocal or something that doesn't actually need that much compression, or maybe I'm using like an LA2A or 1176 to do majority of the compression. I'll still come in here and I'll maybe do like a 2-to-1 with a touch of threshold, and I will literally never see the light. I will never see it actually taking away anything. This is probably the one thing you got to know about SSL is it only lights up once you've done 3 dB of compression between.
That's right.
Between
otherwise, you're
and,
using your ears.
Otherwise, exactly. Otherwise, you got to use your. So on those gentle settings, it may actually look like it's doing nothing, but then when you come down and you hit the comp in and hit the comp in button or the dynamics in button. It allows you to take it in and out, just the dynamic session. You're going to notice a tone shift. Like, even if it's barely doing anything, there's just like with the mic, that flip button, there's this like tone shift that you get that is just, it's very flattering for most sources and give just that little something to a sound that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, these settings I have on the screen, Ben, are exactly, I do this exact same thing as you, which is very often I'll just peg the threshold and I'll literally, this is one of the few compressors I do this. I actually work the ratio knob as sort of the amount, like, and this is like, these are settings, they're foolproof, like essentially foolproof, which is why consoles like this are so regarded for mixing. But the fastest release time is 100 milliseconds. Like, it will never, it'll never sound bad. That's not fast enough to mess with bass stuff. It's not, and same with its attack time. It's 3 milliseconds or whatever it is. It's like these settings, although I generally do the program dependent one, but like these settings, you'll never regret them. They'll just make your mix sound better, like you said. Just super gentle smoothing and like all good. It's like a good button, just a sounds good button.
Exactly. And then the fact that it's the output, I've never wanted a output control on my SSL compressor. Like the fact that it's auto gain is always exactly what I want it to be. And then if it is on or off by a little bit when I go to AB, then I use either the output knob at the bottom, which is a totally clean gain stage, or just pull up or down on that fader a little bit to trim it up, and so it's a nice even comparison between the two. But this is one of those plugins, guys. Like, I can't stress enough how essential this is for at least me personally, for every single mix. Like, this ends up, if I can't think of what I want to use right away, I just default pull this one up and start tweaking until I get the sound I really want.
Yeah, so we'll go through the rest of this GUI tour. We got a link button here, which this links the detection circuit. So if you're using this on a stereo track or on a stereo track, then hitting the link button, what it does is it ensures that the detection circuit between the left and the right is linked, and the compressor will always apply uniform gain so that you don't get shifts in the left and right balance. If you're doing gentle compression or you're doing something that's stereo but doesn't have a lot of left to right movement, you can experiment with that being keeping it unlinked. Some people, I've seen engineers talk about how it feels a little bit wider, so to speak, when they're unlinked. But if it's something if you're doing piano and it's got some left and right motion between the high keys and low keys, you'll probably definitely want it linked. But otherwise, that finishes out the dynamics, the compressor area. The expander gate area here, we have a couple of things. We have first of all, put it in circuit, and then we have 3 different things to choose from. We have expander mode. Expansion and gating are basically turn down low level signals, or hence the term expand dynamic range, the opposite of compressed dynamic range. And expanders do it more gently. They have an actual ratio to them as well, so that when it drops below the threshold, it doesn't immediately turn it off. It just sort of downwardly expands it or turns it down at a given slope. Whereas gates are basically turn it off. Of course, based on the range knob. If you have the range knob at 0, then it won't do anything. And then attack and release are similar here.
Same, exactly. Same. And this is, let's talk about uses for gates, right? Like, this is snare drums, toms, stuff where there's a little bit of leakage, but there's a very obvious thing you want to be let through. This is what they're great for. What are some of the other uses that you've had for expanders or gates?
Well, a nice gentle expander like this can help with headphone bleed and lip smacks. You can put it on a lead vocal and set it just above the, those kinds of things so that it obviously doesn't cut off anything. Toms are another example where I generally like expansion because they're more gentle than gates. Then you don't hear a gate you can hear open and close, especially if your range knob is cranked. I personally never put my range knob beyond 10 or 15 dB.
Yep.
If it's more than that, then I'm going to have to, it's probably in trouble. Or nowadays, fortunately, we have all these tools at our disposal to, augment with samples and so forth.
And that was
good.
That was gonna be my tip for everybody too. Is like the range knob is probably one of the most important ones on here. And so let's take like a snare drum or a tom. Like these are, for me, that's the most often where I'm using an expander or gate to like take out some of the kick drum from the snare drum. Right? You want just the snares poking through. A great way to dial this in. This is something where, unfortunately, you really can't rely on presets to help you judge your expansion because the gain staging of every single track is different. But so the way I like to do it, my default is make the release as fast as possible, where he has it now, and then I'll start by cranking the range up. So I want to exaggerate the effect, and then play with the threshold till it's, and you're gonna the more to the right you do it, the more it's going to be removing, the less sensitive it's getting. So it's taking on more of a peak to get out of the gate or out of the expander. You basically try to find that sweet spot where you're just getting like snap, you're just hearing the snap of the snare poking through, and you're like, all right, yep, there it is. Like that's where my threshold is. So then you can go back and be a more reasonable human being. A lot of times I'll maybe I'll leave the range cranked for a minute because I want to get that release time. The release time is incredibly important when you're expanding or gating because that judges how long do I let the signal through. And you can use this for creative effect. If you got this really long, got a big tom that's just ringing out for way too long, use that release to dial in how long do I want the tom to let ring and make sure it feels kind of natural. Even if your range is maybe exaggerated still, you can use that to really, again, clearly hear how much am I letting that tom through. All right, this feels like it's in the rhythm. It feels like it's breathing with the drums. Now my threshold's good, my release time is good, and then I'll back the range knob all the way back up to 0. How does it sound without this? And then slowly, and then because sometimes honestly, like it sounds fine, and then like just 3 or 6 or 10 dB of reduction. Actually, it'll sound. You end up with much more musical sounding results. The worst thing possible for me in a drum mix is to have just real obvious gating, where you hear it like,
oh god, yeah.
The cymbals come in all for a second. Like you hear like the snare, and now you hear like where did those things come from? And they'll pump and release, and it can get really strange. So getting it's worth the time to sit here and tweak, and you have to do it from track to track to make sure the threshold and the release and the range are all working with you rather than against you.
Yeah, and when you keep in mind that every 6 dB is twice or half as much, this is actually a pretty aggressive. 10 dB is a lot when you think about it in those
really
terms.
is.
Yeah, it's quite a lot. And that's where the side chain, putting the filters in the side chain allow you to. So if your kick drum bleed is starting to make your snare bottom mic trigger open the gate, you can put the filter in the side chain, get rid of all that bottom end, and now this gate is no longer quote unquote listening to that kick drum bottom end. And same with the snare drum. Like so if you got a lot of hi-hat bleed, knock down the top end, but only in the dynamic side chain, that gate's going to ignore that top end. It's going to more reliably and more accurately trigger that gate just by filtering out some of that top end to keep it from listening to that.
Hell yeah.
So,
gotta give you a big shout out, man. Like even Tommy was saying that you've explained dynamic to sidechain better than any teacher he's had before.
Oh wow, how cool, nice.
Which totally, absolutely true, man. Like this is one of those plugins. We could sit here and geek out on it literally all day. This is probably one of the ones I know the most, like the back of my hand, both sonically and functionally. But that's kind of the point. That's what I see people kind of asking us to, can we do the 88 RS? And the answer is yes, guys. We're gonna work,
we're gonna do them all.
We're gonna work our way through almost all the channel strips that we can, because each one of them, they're even if you look at the 88 RS and you look at this one, you're like, well, they both have EQs, they both have compressors and gates, they both have mic. Like there's a lot of shared things between them. But they don't sound the same. They don't perfectly function exactly the same because they were designed by different folks back in the day.
Well, the 88 RS in particular, I use the real one. I use the real 88 RS, and that has some pretty unique features. So it'll definitely be definitely tune in for those, because we'll go through them each like this, and just every knob. And I think and I feel like we've covered everything on this one. I'm pretty sure. So I haven't been watching the chat, but yeah, they're deep. They're deep.
They certainly are. yeah, if you guys have any other questions before we wrap up here, hit us up in the chat if you want anything else. But Drew, I think you did a fantastic explanation here of one of my favorite tools. I guess
Awesome.
Connor or Matt, any tricks or tips that you guys have on using SSL?
No, man, that was perfect, Drew. That was really great. Thanks for that.
Yeah, great job, Drew.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Nice. And I think a lot of people were eyeing other plugins, and now they're looking at this SSL in their carts. Smart, right? Yeah. So it's a really fun one. I guess before we jump off of it, Drew, the cool thing, we talked about how like presets really don't work for the expander. That being said, guys, the preset selection for especially for the SSL channel, the preset collection from artists is huge. There's so many great options, and these are amazing starting points. So if you're ever, and we've talked about this before, man, but presets are such a great way to learn a plugin and to like see, okay, Chuck Sawicki, like on live kick, what's his kind of go-to for kick thing, and you can pick up tips and ideas from how pros were using this plugin to do certain things, and whether or not again, gain stage and all these things matter, but you can see like, were they really aggressive with the EQ, were they aggressive with the compressor, what's in, what's out. There's so much knowledge to be learned just by kind of browsing presets, auditioning them, and then tweaking them to fit your track. So this is always a great place to start if you're ever unsure how to use a plugin or really where it sounds best, man. Like, or just if you're looking to get inspired on a sound that isn't, you're just not feeling it yet. Man, just
see. Look, just Blaze knows where it's at. He's got that flip into the transformer for his 808. Right? Look at that.
Yep.
He's got his. So yeah, that's a great point, Ben. Because a lot of people think, oh, presets are lame. Presets are why you can't mix with presets. That's not what they're for. They're starting points, and they're for if you're just getting there, just learning a plugin. Yeah, they're an education on what to kind of draw your attention to. Nobody's going to mix with presets. Of course, you're going to adjust it, but yeah, that's a great point.
Good question here. Magnus was asking, what's the little thingy between the output fader and the output knob, the little gray thing there?
That assigned SSL consoles had VCA groups, right? They had voltage controlled amplifiers that were in the center section. So if you look at a big SL4000, in the center section there were typically 8 faders, and this is a thumb wheel that you literally would turn with your thumb or your fingernail and would assign it to any of those given VCA groups. And so basically it was like, if you look back at our subgroup show last week, they were assignable to those subgroups, although they weren't audio subgroups. You weren't rerouting things. They were just kind of like VCA group control over folks. Yeah, like group faders. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that thumb wheel would have turned from 0, which was none, and go 1 through 8 for any of those 8 groups that were there.
Nice. Awesome. Well, Drew, man, that was an epic tour of the SSL, and lots of really great tips and ideas there for anybody at home that's looking to try something different, or even if you're already using the SSL. Hopefully, you guys walked away with some ideas of some things to try out that you may have not used before. Hit the flip button. Just whatever you do, hit the flip button, guys. You're gonna like it. But great. Well, guys, this is really great show. Awesome, kind of deep diving on automation. This should, again, we hope that these streams work as a reference for you guys in the future. If you've got questions about automations, you can come back and rewatch this. Always hit us up in the comments if anything's unclear. If you guys have questions, the whole purpose of us doing these shows each week is to answer questions for you guys and get you guys more excited about making music here inside of Luna and with UAD plugins. And yeah, send us your music live at uaudio.com. Happy birthday, Luna! Man, what a year. This is a bunch of you guys have noticed that we're on show number 93, I think. So we're coming up on number 100.
Wow.
Don't worry, we'll do something fun and different for 100, but holy crap, guys. Like this, what a year it's been. And there's people in the chat. I've seen you guys here with us from day one, and just want to
unbelievable.
Say how much
cool.
we appreciate you guys and the community.
Seriously.
Right? We wouldn't be doing this if you guys weren't here each week to hang out with us and to learn and to share. So as always, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you, Matt, Drew, and Connor for joining me and helping transfer all this information out of our heads into other people's. And anything else before we go?
It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think
Thanks,
I
everybody.
think that's it. Yeah,
Got
thanks
it.
everybody for watching.
All right, everybody have a good week. We'll see you guys back here next
Peace.
Monday. Peace.
See ya.
Bye.